Who should the 49ers target in free agency? Well, ESPN.com has an idea. Steph and I will talk about that. Plus, with the combine just about a week away, the draft rumors are continuing to swirl, and that includes a brand new mock draft from Daniel Jeremiah. We'll talk about it all on today's Bully Ball podcast. What is good, everybody? Welcome to the Bully Ball Podcast and the Gold Standard and the Fans First Sports Network. I'm Rob Stats Guerrera, pinch hitting for Jason Aponte alongside Steph Sanchez. Steph, once again, you're stuck with me.
Unfortunately, Rob, but we'll make it work. I mean, we roll with the punches here.
Good. Say all the mean things you usually say when I'm behind the glass when Jay is here. That's fine. You could just say them to my face.
I will.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Steph said the meanest thing to me she's ever said. And she once told me she would trade in our friendship for a Super Bowl championship. I'll tell you what that was a little bit later in the show. But let's just dive into free agency because obviously the Niners have some decisions to make. They have some free agents of their own. The franchise tag window opens today. I don't think the Niners have anybody worth tagging, so they're not going to do that. But you let me know. I actually didn't even see this, Steph. You shared with me an article from ESPN.com about free agent fits. It was the top 50 free agent fits, and they go through and they list a bunch of players and they match them up with a bunch of teams. One of them you didn't like, that was Talanoa Hufanga getting matched to the 49ers. Why didn't you like that one?
Because I was like, I mean, it's kind of lame for them to list one of their own free agents as a fit. Like, no shit, we know it's a fit. Like, he was on the team already. They drafted him, but no, I don't think he's going to be returning anyway. So, like, why are we doing that? That kind of defeats the purpose of the whole exercise, I feel like. But I was intrigued by the other one, Rob.
Well, the other one, in case you're wondering, is Asante Samuel Jr., who, of course, is on the Chargers right now with Jim Harbaugh. And I'll just read what it says in the ESPN site. A shoulder injury limited Samuel to 4 games last season, but he has the traits to produce at a position of need in Robert Saleh's defense. Mooney Ward's a free agent, meaning there could be a hole at corner. Samuel has a playmaking mentality with the foot quickness and sudden closing speed to break on the ball in zone and man looks. I would be intrigued, Steph, not going to lie.
And this is a position of need for the 49ers. One thing that I think the 49ers do very well is prior to the draft, like they kind of set up the draft via free agency because they're going to fill some holes and it'll make it a little bit clearer after, that first free agency wave, what the idea is going into the draft, what they want to get younger at, what they're going to target. So I think we'll see a lot of those need filling moves in free agency. And this is certainly one of them. I mean, we know that they need a third corner in the mix. We're not quite sure what Darrell Luter is going to be. So I think this is a proven option that, makes their secondary stronger.
I was talking with Vish about this yesterday, and he mentioned the same thing you just said about how the Niners kind of set up their draft sort of as a reaction to what happens in free agency. Clearly they have a need for sure. They absolutely do. I have more confidence in the 49ers to draft a corner that can play than I have confidence in them to draft a defensive lineman that can play, right? They drafted Diamador Lenore. They drafted Darrell Luter, who they're high on. They drafted Renardo Green, who looks very promising. When it comes to defensive linemen, other than Nick Bosa, all the guys stink. So I almost feel like I would rather them pay for a defensive lineman in free agency where you're essentially paying to eliminate risk, right? You draft a guy, it's a gamble. Free agency, you're paying to eliminate that risk because you're getting a proven performer. So sign free agents according to your draft weaknesses. That's what I say. So as I think Samuel would be a good player and I would love to have him, but I almost feel like defensive line would be the position I would target just because they stink at drafting those guys.
Yeah. And I kind of wonder if the 49ers kind of see it similarly, because if I recall, I think they were one of the teams that has proposed in the past at the annual league meetings to have the draft moved before free agency, right? So that, you could kind of do the opposite of what they do now. But yeah, I do still think defensive lineman obviously is going to be something that they target in free agency as well. You'll probably see at least some guys like I know the biggest draw is going to be Myles Garrett. I still think and hope that they would put themselves in a position to make an offer for him. Although Matt Mayoko's recent comments on it haven't been very encouraging on that front. I don't know if you've caught that, Rob, but now he's like off of the idea that the 49ers should go after Myles Garrett. It doesn't make sense because up picks for a player before and it hasn't worked out. That player, of course, being Trey Lance, which obviously we know that didn't work out. But the difference that I keep saying between giving up that many draft picks for a draft pick in Trey Lance is different than, a known commodity who is at the top of his position. So that to me is the difference. And then he also brings up, the cost standpoint, which, okay, fine. Like, yes, you would have to pay Myles Garrett as well. You're already paying Nick Bosa a ton of money. So that I get. But anyway, just to get off my soapbox, yeah, they will address defensive line in free agency as well. And, I'm deep in the weeds into my draft sheet and just the draft process in general. One thing that I have found to be not really a trend, but just something they do sometimes is that they will sign players who they've had in as top 30 visits when that player was coming out of the draft, right? So the reason that Asante Samuel was intriguing is because back in 2021, he was one of their top 30 visits, right? And I've also pointed out to people that all but 2 drafts since 2017, they have ended up drafting at least 3 of their top 30 visits. Those are pretty good odds. Those are the best odds that we're going to have as any to indicate like the 49ers real interest in certain players, right? So, and it hasn't been uncommon for them to sign guys in free agency that they've had for top 30 visits. For example, Jordan Elliott was a top 30 visit back in 2020. He later signed as a free agent. Yetur Gross-Matos signed last offseason. He was a top 30 visit in 2020, right? So they do have a history of going back to players that they've liked in the past. I have more examples, but yeah, I always feel like that's something interesting to look at. And so Asante Samuel, one of those guys, Azeez Ojulari, edge from the Giants, he's going to be a free agent. He's one of those guys they had a top 30 visit with, right? So Najee Harris, running back, I've seen him thrown out as an option as well. So I think some of these guys, the 49ers, will give an extra look to. And so that's why I find the top 30 visits, who the 49ers are interested in. That's why I find it so entertaining for myself, because you do kind of see these trends and, behaviors of this team.
First of all, that's why everybody needs to follow Steph's draft sheet, because you keep track of everybody the Niners are scouting, everybody the Niners are talking to, who's visiting. You keep track of all of that stuff and you update it throughout the entire draft season. So everybody should go and check that out. If they want to do that, Steph, where can they find it?
It is tagged on my Twitter. It's pinned to my Twitter. Unfortunately, it's not like an easy URL to just throw out there and you can type it in. So you'll have to find it on my Twitter, but it's right at the top, 49ers draft sheet. And then also in my recent videos, I have it in the description of videos as well. So you guys can find it there.
And Steph's Twitter is at Steph49K for anyone that doesn't already know. Definitely go and check that out. And I think it's a good point that you make. We think of this draft stuff as a 1-year only thing, right? We think of it as, well, they study these guys for the draft, and then the draft happens, and then it's over, and that, goes into a book somewhere, never to be thought of again. And that's not the case at all. A lot of times, it's where they are forming their opinion of the player. And is this a player that we would be interested in maybe down the line, maybe next year in a trade? Who knows, whatever circumstance may pop up. And so I do think that you have to look at what they're doing with the visits with a keen eye, because it's not just a 1-year thing. It's a many year thing. That's where they form their opinion of the player. Look what Kyle said about Sam Darnold. Oh, he loved him coming out in the draft. He was so great. He ignored all the bad crap we saw from Sam Darnold, and he wanted him because he liked him when he came out of USC. So keeping track of the top 30 visits, I think, is incredibly smart and incredibly important if you want to sort of peek into the team's decision-making process.
Hey, Rob, another name that I didn't mention, but has also been linked to the 49ers because of another connection. And that is because he's with the Jets and he was playing under Robert Saleh with the Jets, linebacker Jamian Sherwood. He's also someone who the 49ers had as a top 30 visit back in 2021. And so he makes a lot of sense, not just because of that, but like I said, the connection of Robert Saleh. And he's a free agent. 49ers need a linebacker if they don't re-sign Dre Greenlaw, which right now that's what it's looking like, right? So that's a name that could pop up as well.
Yeah, the Dre Greenlaw thing, Nick Bosa said, oh, Robert Saleh really wants him back. And then Matt Barrows went on KMBR and said basically Greenlaw wants to run his own shop, which I thought was really interesting. We don't really think of that in terms of players. We think of it in terms of like coaches, right? Coordinators who want to become head coaches or coordinators who want to eventually call the plays for their offense. We don't think of it in terms of players wanting to be like, hey, I'd like to be the man in the middle of the defense. So I thought that was a really interesting thing from Barrows and kind of a specific thing that I feel like he's not going to mention unless he's heard that somewhere.
I think so too. And I think, the fact that it kind of came, a couple weeks after the comment that Nick Bosa made, it was almost like, oh, well, it's probably not going to happen because I've since heard this. Like that's what it sounded like to me. Of course, like he didn't indicate that he's heard that somewhere, but I agree. I do kind of pay attention to what these beat writers have been saying lately. And, sometimes it is opinion, but sometimes it's an opinion based on an inkling that they've gotten from someone in the building or something else that they've heard. So I think, you definitely got to read the tea leaves a bit.
D'Angelo Evans, thank you for the comment on YouTube, says Niners have zero money to make a big splash. They've got some money. They've got some money that they're carrying over this year. They can restructure / extend George Kittle, which I think they're going to do. They can restructure Fred Warner. They could restructure Nick Bosa. They can create money if they want to. Will they? I don't know. Should they? That's a different discussion. All I'm saying is if they want to, they can. Nobody thought they were going to be able to sign Javon Hargrave, and then boom, it was hold everything. Oh my God, the 49ers are making this giant splash. So I would disagree with you, D'Angelo. I think they can. If they want to, they can find a way to make it work.
I agree with that. But just going back to the beat writer thing, Matt Mayoko has said this in one of his recent shows I think it was on his YouTube channel. He said, yeah, I'm not expecting the 49ers to make a big splash in free agency because, they don't have money to be giving away to a lot of people. But I agree that I think if they want to, and if it's someone worth the while, that they will make it work. But again, some of these comments that I'm hearing beat writers make is almost like they're preparing us in a way for what's to come. And I don't know if I agree or like what I've been hearing so far.
I feel like that is exactly something that I would say, right? They're not saying this for no reason. The team wants it out there to sort of grease the skids to the fan reaction of, hey, we're not making a big splash. And I don't think the 49ers need to make a big splash, Steph. I mean, they're always fun, especially from our perspective, right? They're good for business. But the Eagles just showed you can sign quality players that aren't quote unquote a big splash and still get really, really good players. Now, Saquon was a big splash, but there was other players that Howie Roseman brought in that were key contributors for them this year that weren't like massive breaking news, drop everything type players. And there's no reason the 49ers can't add one of those guys.
Yeah, I agree. And I think they will, right? Like, I think there will be a number of like tier 2 guys that they bring in, high-end tier 2 players. Like I kind of see like a player like Azeez Ojulari, for example, as we mentioned earlier, is like a high-end tier 2 player that they can bring in at a position of need that's going to be able to help them out and you get good value. Like I do think there's going to be some value adds that the 49ers can get at positions of need. Like we've talked about it before, Darius Slayton, another one. And Rob, I'll also say, like, I don't think that we need to necessarily look at just the pool of free agents that we know are going to be available. Like, as happens every year, every team, almost every team, is going to have a cap casualty type of player, a player that just simply does not make sense. You get a new head coach, new GM or something in the building, and you're like, this player does not fit what we're looking for anymore. We're going to cut this player. We can't afford this player anymore. We're going to cut this player. So yeah, and as you're showing here, The Athletic put out a piece for potential salary cap cuts for all 32 teams. Some of these are some that we know already. For example, for the 49ers, they listed Javon Hargrave. So that's not news to us. We knew that he would be a cut for the 49ers this offseason. But some are kind of like projections, right? So the reason that I thought this piece was interesting is because there's a lot of players interested listed at positions of need that the 49ers have. So there's a number of edge rushers here. Von Miller, for example. I know, like, he's old. He's 36, or he's going to be 36. He'd be a rotational guy, but I like it for the vibes. There's other guys as well. Sheldon Rankins, for example, a defensive tackle. Miles Sanders, a running back. Like, if you want to bring in another running back, and you've had it with Elijah Mitchell. There's just options out there. And so there's safeties listed. Zadarius Smith, another edge. The Packers are expected to, part ways with Jair Alexander. That was actually reported this morning too. So again, some of these are all but certain to happen. And so some of these names to me, Rob, were intriguing.
There were a couple names that jumped out to me. Jair Alexander is one I wrote down. Something weird is going on there, Steph. I don't know what happened between them and the Packers, but from people I know that cover the Packers that have told me privately, like, things are not right. There's some sort of beef going on. Alexander has only played 14 games in the last 2 years with Green Bay. This is a guy that was a second-team All-Pro twice, like, really good player. I don't know what went wrong there, but, when you see him on a cut list, you might think like, oh, well, he stinks. And it's like, maybe his play has dropped off a little, but maybe there's something else going on there where if the 49ers did swoop in, they could end up with a really good player without having to pay top of the market rate to get him.
I don't know. The last time that happened with the former Packers player was Devondre Campbell, and that didn't really work out like we had hoped. But I think the bigger issue with Jair Alexander is that he's hurt quite a lot. Like I think now these last 2 seasons, his availability just hasn't been the same, which would be an issue for me. Like, that's something I think the 49ers need. And I think that's part of the reason why, like, this team in general, it feels like they want to go younger, because you have guys who are fresher and could hopefully potentially stay healthier. So yeah, I think I'd pass on someone like him, but there's other options, like I said, that are going to be out there. And, the Jamel Dean, for example, like, that's a nice corner. There's a number of wide receivers. We keep talking about wide receivers, Devontae Adams being one of them, of course. So we expect Kendrick Bourne was another one listed for the Patriots. We know Cooper Kupp's going to be on another team next year. If they don't find a trade partner for him, he's going to be released. Christian Kirk was another name from the wide receiver pool that I thought was interesting, because there was a point in time where, I really like Christian Kirk, but another player that has dealt with injuries that, maybe that complicates it a little bit, because you want someone, if you're going to bring them in, to be a little more of a certainty, especially because the reason you're bringing them in is because of existing uncertainty with Deebo Samuel potentially leaving, with Brandon Ayuk. You don't know when he's going to be back to full health. So, yeah, I think all of that plays into it.
When you said Jamel Dean, I just have this memory in my head of Brock Purdy chucking it deep against the Buccaneers, because the call on the announcer on the call says, he beats Dean. And so, like, in my head, when I think of Jamel Dean, I think of Brandon Ayuk catching the ball and running for like a 70-yard touchdown. That's the only, like, memory I have.
Well, he's a better player than that one play. I'll just I'll say that. But Rob, there's another player mentioned who has the same last name as another player on the 49ers, and that would be Joey Bosa. There's been some smoke around this as of late because I believe their mom has been getting in on the action and sharing Joey Bosa in a 49ers jersey. And so
Mhm.
I think, obviously, as a mom, you'd love to see both of your boys on the same team in the NFL. That'd be kind of cool. And it just feels like this offseason, if he ends up being a cut, this might be the best actual opportunity to make that happen. I don't know if I'm on the fence. Like, for the vibes, sure, but from a player standpoint, he's hurt a lot. Again, like, a lot of the players listed on this list have drawbacks, right? That's why they're not being re-signed with their team. And so his drawback has been availability, not being able to stay healthy. So I don't know if I would love it, but if he like signed for a reasonable deal, cheap, why not?
First of all, as a parent of 2 kids that play sports, I will just say it's so much easier when your kids play on the same team. Like, please. I totally get where Cheryl Bose is coming from. If you're watching the stream, you can see the pictures that she put out there. It's both Bosa's and Niners uniforms with their hands over their hearts like they're standing at the anthem. Here's the thing with Joey Bosa. You got to understand what you're getting, okay? He had 5 sacks last year. He had 6.5 the year before. He had 2.5 in 5 games the year before that. He is not like, you're not getting a Nick Bosa clone. You're getting a worse player than Nick Bosa. You're getting an older player than Nick Bosa. Now, if he's a piece of what they decide to do along that defensive line, I really like it, right? You keep Leonard Floyd, you add Joey Bosa, you still draft people in the draft and relatively early too, in the top 3 rounds. You get a new defensive tackle, whatever the case may be. If he's a part of that, I like it. If he's the only guy that they really address it with in a major way, I don't like it at all.
Yeah, can't be.
Right.
Can't be. And I think everyone in the comments understands, right? Like, he'd be rotational, he'd be depth. He's washed, sure. But does he understand that, right? Like, and so I think it's important for players to understand where they are in their careers, and then if they do, they're more willing to take a reasonable contract. I'm not saying vet minimum, like he'd probably get a little bit more than that. But if he were to take a discount of what he thinks his market is to play with his brother, to stay on the West Coast, then why not? Like I said, I agree. It can't be the only move. But as I said before, I do expect the 49ers to bring in some tier 2, tier 3 edge player, defensive line guys, right? So he would fall under like a high-end tier 3, maybe, sort of guy at this point in his career. So, why not? It would just fit one of those small needs.
You need to make a promise to everyone, to me and to everyone right now, Steph. As Strawberry React says, if Joey Bosa gets cut and the Niners sign him, I can't wait to see Steph do a Bosa Brothers skit.
I'd have to study his voice because his voice and cadence is a little different than Nick's. So I'd have some studying to do. But yeah, I mean, obviously I'd have to do that.
All right, you heard it. She's on the books now. That's it. We're holding you to it. I almost want it to happen for that reason alone, quite honestly. And look, maybe Joey would, get a little revitalized by playing with your brother, playing with Robert Saleh, who I'm sure he's probably heard a lot of good things about from Nick over the years, and maybe you can get a little bit, an 8.5 sack season from Joey Bosa in sort of a rotational situation. I would love that. That would be great. And the fact that you can continue to add to that part of your team, because he's not going to cost you any draft picks. Okay. Like, I could see the rationale, at least when it comes to that. If you're not going to, make a trade for a Trey Hendrickson, who, by the way, I don't think people realize Trey Hendrickson has had 17.5 sacks each of the last 2 years. Like, the dude is a monster. But you got to give up draft resources to get him. If they're not going to go that route, I understand the rationale behind a Joey Bosa move if it does happen.
Yeah. I mean, wouldn't mind it. It wouldn't be my first choice. Like I said, there's other names on this list that if they end up being cuts for real, I would want those players ahead of Joey Bosa. But yeah, it's an option.
I talked about it with Vish yesterday, and he didn't love the idea. He didn't love the sort of vibes, sort of culture that would kind of permeate the 49ers locker room with both Bosas there. I mean, the Bosas. They're not the most
Bosas.
They're not the most Riley of people. They're very chill and calm and laid back, and it's not exactly like the hunger, the angry lions, like the Dre Greenlaw type of psychos that the 49ers defense has had, when it was at its best.
Yeah, I get it. And then also, what was it, like 2 years ago when they brought in Chase Young? And like Bosa's gotten, I think, a lot of what he wishes, let's just say in some time. So they did the Chase Young trade that made Bosa happy. To give him then Joey Bosa to be like a rotational piece, be on the same team with him, would kind of have a similar vibe, like, again, almost like playing favorites. So I don't know.
The Chargers have the cap space. They have the 6th most effective cap space in the league, so they don't have to cut him. But Bosa's cap hit is $36.5 million. That's the highest for any edge rusher in the league. And this just in, Joey Bosa is far from the best edge rusher in the league. So I'm not saying the Chargers have to cut him, but I just feel like it's in their interest to cut. Even if you want to try to bring him back, I don't know. You're going to just pay him that just because you have the space. That's generally not how NFL teams operate.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Like the names listed in this article are just projections, and that's why you see sometimes good players, because some of those good players are being paid more than what they're producing or have as of late. So yeah, like teams have to make decisions on them. They're not worth the value to that team anymore. Just like the 49ers moving on from Deebo Samuel. I know it's because he requested a trade, but like, let's just say he didn't. I still think that Deebo would be on the chopping block. Maybe Kyle Shanahan doesn't agree, but like, I think a lot of people in the building would. And so, yeah, you just got to weigh what the value is for any of those players. So kind of the same deal. Javon Hargrave, he hasn't produced to the level of his contract. That's why he's going to be a cut. And yeah, the other teams are going to be in similar situations.
What about Graham Gano? Could be a cap casualty, Steph. We need a kicker.
Well, we know that whatever free agent kicker they bring in is probably going to do better than Jake Moody. They have before in every other scenario I can think of. And so I don't think it'll be too hard to move on from Jake Moody if that's what they really want to do. And I think it's time. I mean, you brought in a new special teams coordinator who has no ties to him at all. Come on, you got to make it happen.
Yeah, and it's not like the cap hit would be anything. It's less than $500,000, so you wouldn't have to worry about that. Heineman on Twitch says, sign Drew Dahlman and move on. The cap window is open. I don't know if they would consider using the tag on him if Atlanta would. In case you're wondering, the non-exclusive tag for an offensive lineman is $25 million. So
it's a lot.
Yeah. Does Atlanta want to pay, Drew Dahlman $25 million? I don't know. I can't tell you. I'll look up really quick. Let's see. Creed Humphrey has the highest average per year for a center. That's $18 million. So if you're going to tag Drew Dahlman, you're going to make him the highest paid center in the league.
Yeah, I don't think they do that. And I don't think I think they let him walk. I don't think the 49ers would pay him that much if he becomes a free agent and they bring him in, right? Like, he's not worth that much. So, and they'll have other options. I know, like, he's at the top of the list, obviously, for center upgrades. But again, I mentioned, like, to upgrade at center, the bar's pretty low, I think. And if you just it is, like, if you just get not anyone, but like a serviceable guy, I feel like it would make a hell of a difference, because there's been scenarios where they've brought in guys and we didn't really know who they were, when they come in and they just fit in on this line, and it makes everything else better. I think the reason that the offensive line looked so bad last season had a lot to do with the center play, right? With Jake Brendel. And so if you just fix that, the offensive line is going to look fine. That's why I continue to think that they're not going to get an offensive lineman with the first round pick. Like, that's just not really their MO. Although, like, they've done in the past when they've picked that high. I do think if someone in the top 10, any one of those guys does fall to them, then you go for it. But otherwise, maybe a Membao, you could trade back a couple spots and get Armand Membao, and that would be good. But other than that, I don't think the team sees offensive line as a big need. And free agency and the moves they make then, like we're saying, is going to tell us what holes they'll need to fill on the offensive line. And, not to mention, they got some free agents of their own that I think are tier 3 free agents who may not get any, bites in free agency, right? Ben Barch, for example, is one. I think he's a candidate to come back after the first wave of free agents, right? So I think they'll have an unsexy way of addressing the offensive line. But if you're going to have any, it's not even really sexy, but like if you're going to have any big-ish move, I think center would and should be the one.
Yes, please. And I think also we know how important the center's job is in this offense, calling out the protections, adjusting the offensive protections and things like that. That to me leads me to believe it's got to be a veteran guy. It's got to be a free agent, because Kyle is not going to draft the center and just throw him in there. First of all, they don't like to throw rookies in there right away, period, at any position, let alone one that's such a big ask of someone mentally who's also trying to adjust to the speed of the game at the next level. So I think that they will try and solve that with a veteran player. So I would love that to be Dahlman. And I agree on Barch. I was, very curious to see. I was really hoping he would stay healthy last year so we could kind of get a extended look at him. But I agree. Left guard, center, definitely need improvement for the 49ers, and there are avenues that they can pursue to get that improvement. Daza0187, YouTube channel member. Shout out to all the YouTube channel members. I appreciate you. Daza says, if you're going to invest 55 plus million into Brock, you have to significantly invest in the offensive line. It's like buying a Ferrari and skimping on insurance. They're not gonna.
It's like we do the same song and dance. I feel like every time. I mean, I remember people saying the same thing when they signed Jimmy Garoppolo, right? And now, Brock Purdy is better. What is he better at, particularly moving around in the pocket? So if anything, that probably makes the 49ers believe, hey, we actually don't need to invest as heavily in the offensive line because we have a quarterback who can escape the pocket and be elusive. And he's not just a statue in the pocket, which is true. And it is a benefit and it does help your offensive line out. I don't agree with, that type of line of thinking, but it would not shock me if that's how the 49ers see it. I don't think they changed the way they handle the offensive line. I don't think they significantly invest in it.
It's like, hey, you live in a flood zone. Do you want flood insurance? No, that's okay. I'm a strong swimmer. Like, not necessarily sure that's the best way to go about it, but I agree with you. I don't think they're going to change it. The 49ers generally, especially when it comes to the draft, don't do the obvious thing, right? You and I did the draft show, and it was like, okay, here we go. The Niners are up. Let's see. The offensive lineman, is it going to be Sua Mataya? What are they going to do? Roger Rosengarten? And then it's Cooper DeJean for 30 seconds. And then it's Pearsall. And we're like, oh, okay. They went wide receiver there. Like, they never do what we think they're going to do in the draft.
Yeah. And it's frustrating, in a sense. But I mean, I don't know. They don't go with consensus at all. Sometimes it's worked out for them. Sometimes, a lot of times it hasn't, right? So, it's hit or miss, which that's the draft though. That's how it goes. I do think that them picking earlier in the draft takes a little bit of the guesswork out of it because there's only so many guys there. At least I think, right? Like they can't reach for someone that bad there, right?
Never put it past them. Don't say that. Daniel
That jinx.
Jeremiah has a mock draft that just came out. He has Will Johnson, the defensive back from Michigan, the corner, going to the Niners. Says Johnson is a scheme fit and his size will play well in a division featuring wide receivers built like power forwards. That sounds good. And like, we get it. But again, like I just said, I don't think they're doing it. I think that, Chris Forrester gave a press conference, Steph, at some point after the draft last year. And he was asked like, hey, are you getting kind of ticked off that the Niners aren't really investing the offensive line in the draft? And his answer was, Kyle's philosophy is go get the guys that could score touchdowns and we'll figure it out with the offensive line because, you can't fake it. The guys that can score, you can't fake that basically. The offensive line, you could sort of muddle through. And I thought that was a very honest thing from Chris Forrester. And I feel like that's what the 49ers do for the most part.
Yeah, they do. I've seen Will Johnson mocked a number of times actually at this point. And one thing I do believe, while I think offensive line is going to be a long shot in the first round, I heavily think that it will be defense, a defensive pick. My thinking is that it'll be defensive tackle just because there's a Walter Nolan, like in fact, Nolan was picked right after Johnson in that mock that Daniel Jeremiah had. So he would have been available there for the 49ers. That's one pick I like. You can go edge. The argument against taking a defensive tackle, I think at 11 though, is that this defensive tackle class is so stinking deep. So you can get value, later in the draft. So they don't necessarily need to go defensive tackle there. I'll listen to that, because I think that's true. And the 49ers could certainly feel that way as well, which then, in turn potentially puts corner there. Again, that would kind of be similar to last year where it wasn't a position that we really felt was a huge need for them. We figured they'd draft it, but not that high. Corner could very well be one of those picks as well. And I think I feel like recently we've seen an influx of rookie corners having a lot of success. Like even Ronaldo Green had a pretty good season. Cooper DeJean could have been a Niner, was a Niner for 30 seconds. Had a ton of success in Philadelphia. So it wouldn't shock me if the 49ers, think, hey, like, okay, we didn't get DeJean last year. Let's go corner this time and get this stud. So I wouldn't put it past them just because, like you said, they often go a direction that we weren't really thinking of in the first place. So corner could potentially be that. But if I had to bet money today, it's going to be a defensive player.
I would like that. Like I know offensive line is a need. I get that. But like your offense is pretty set. You got McCaffrey, you've got the receivers, you got Kittle. You're pretty much set there. Your defense was bad last season. Like it has the most work that needs to be done. If you're like in a house, yeah, you'd like to, do the crown molding, but if your basement floods, you got to fix that first. And the Niners have had problems defensively. They need to reinvest there. And I hope that they do, whether it's defensive line, whether it's corner. I wouldn't like to see them go safety, that not in the first round anyway. Not necessarily there, but there are so many spots on the offensive line or on the defense. I think the offensive line, it needs work, but I don't think it's nearly as bad as people think. Like, Moon Man Ed is in the chat, and I appreciate the comment. He says the O-line sucks. What do you mean? It's not great, but it's not horrible either. Like, I think for some reason people think that Brock Purdy had to dodge like 3 free rushers every time he dropped back to pass. That's not the case.
Also, that ignores the fact that Brock had one of the highest, like, didn't he end up with like one of the highest time to throws, or like some points in the season, his time to throw was way more than it was, the previous year. So, that's going to be part of it as well. Your quarterback takes more time. The offensive line is not going to hold up forever. And I agree with that. I also agree, like, it was really just 1-2 bad apples that you had much of the season. Aaron Banks, Brendel, like you fix that and you're golden. And even with that, the offensive line, I think, ranked in like the first half or the top half of the league. So no, it isn't as bad as people make it out to be. There was a super chat earlier from Nick Ellert. How many holes can 49ers fill in free agency? I think a decent amount. Like, I think as far as depth goes, they'll definitely do that. We already talked about the fact that, like, we're not expecting any big free agency signings, although we do think they could if they really wanted to. Like, I think they bring in high-end tier 2 edge rusher. Again, a name I keep mentioning is Azeez Ojulari. I think they bring in tier 2, tier 3 wide receiver. So, again, I think a name like Darius Slayton could be one of those guys. And there's going to be plenty others as well. As far as linebackers go, Jamie Sherwood, an option for the 49ers. You know, I think these kind of back half of the roster kind of positions or depth pieces, I think they'll be able to address. And, you know, hopefully that puts them in a position to be able to go best player available in the draft and, you know, also build out their defense.
I was just going to say that. Hopefully what you do in free agency is that you put yourself in a position to be flexible in the draft. Drafting for need is a very scary proposition. Brian Billick, the Super Bowl champion head coach, always said, need is a terrible evaluator. You don't want, the draft is a different thing. It's not really about need. Like, it is, but it's about getting good players. There's so much uncertainty when it comes to the draft that it's like doing it on hard mode. If you have to, one, figure out who the good players are, and two, only take from X amount of positions because you have such a need. Like, it's hard enough to get good picks when you could pick all the positions, if that makes sense. So I do not want to see them forced to draft for need. Do enough in free agency where you feel like, you know what, we're okay. We'll be okay. We can get through it. Now let's just look to add cheap, young, good players to our team in April.
And speaking of, we have the combine happening next week. I won't be there, unfortunately. I'm going to be out of town, so I won't be able to make it this year. But we will get a lot of news as to who the 49ers are meeting with, just to like sort of set the expectation of what that may sound like. You know, players are going to be asked, have you met with this team and whatnot? And you'll also hear whether it was a formal or informal meeting. Now, my understanding of it is the formal meetings are meetings that are like scheduled beforehand with that team, and it's like the set time that you have to meet with that team. So it is formal. You know, the informal ones are like somewhat more in passing, that you get to meet with maybe a certain rep from a certain team, maybe not with everyone that's there, but you know, it's an informal meeting. So that's the difference between the two. Definitely formal, you know, in my opinion, carries a little more weight because it's, you know, an allotted set of formal meetings that the teams could have at the combine. So to me, I think it means just a little bit more. And so, yeah, just look out for that. We're going to get a lot of more reports next week about that. And again, check out my draft sheet. I got like close to 50 names on the draft sheet today. And so we'll get an influx of players after next week that will be added on there. So keep a lookout.
Absolutely. There are going to be rumors swirling from Indianapolis because everybody's there. You mentioned the informal meetings. The good agents, too, will find a way to happen to bump into John Lynch or happen to bump into, like, trust me, there's plenty of that going on. I expect the Debo trade talk to pick up next week as well. Because don't forget, he's got that option bonus due at the end of March. So they're going to, they're going to be looking to see if they can swing something, make something happen. Who the hell knows? All that stuff is going to be coming out. So I know that, let's be honest, things quieted down a little bit after the Super Bowl. Well, they're going to ramp back up because we're going to do combine. The new league year is March 12th. So that's when free agency begins. So there'll be plenty of stuff in the hopper for us to react to and freak out about and scan social media about and all of that. Moonman Ed said, Steph, can you post your draft sheet link, please? You said it's pinned to your...
Yeah, it's pinned on my Twitter. So Steph49K, you can find it there. But Rob, I also put it in the private chat. So if you can drop it in there, I can't post it on here because my YouTube stream failed. But
yes, I will drop it in the YouTube chat right now. Steph's.
But why you do that? I'm glad you mentioned that it's not just a fun and exciting week about, the players that are in this draft, but there's so much that happens at Combine Week just because it's a meeting of the minds. There's execs from all these teams and front office folks from all these different teams, agents, as you mentioned. And so a lot gets moving and wheels start turning in that week, or at the very least, you hear about things that are happening on that week. Right. So yeah, we'll definitely get some news on that. And I think we'll have content. Let's just say that.
Do you think that Kyle Shanahan will go to the Combine?
No. He never goes.
He hasn't been going the past couple of years. But remember one year he went because he had to teach the scheme to the coaches because they had all the coaching turnover. Do you think that, I don't know, maybe it's a little more settled because Saleh, I don't think he's going to go. Do you think Saleh will be there?
I don't know. I mean, maybe. I would love it if they went. I love when coaches are hands-on. I often talk about Mike Tomlin because that dude is the most hands-on coach I've ever seen when it comes to the draft, and he is front and center everywhere. He's not afraid to be seen. He almost likes to be seen, I'm convinced. And so he'll be everywhere. But yeah, I do wish he'll be there, but Kyle has said in the past, he doesn't see the big importance of it. Kyle's more of a tape guy. The tape will tell me everything I need to know. I don't need to see him running in, these short shorts to, be convicted about a certain player. Right. I think it helps, just cross some T's and dot some I's as far as measurables and whatnot. But I think from Kyle's standpoint, he sees everything that he needs to see from the tape. So he doesn't see the value in it. As far as meeting with players, I think that's where I think it matters most. But again, they can do that at top 30 visits, right? If there's someone that Kyle really wants to meet and, get a feel for his character, that's when those conversations will happen. He'll be there, right? So yeah, we'll see. I always wish they were more involved as far as, the coaching staff, but, I trust the scouting department as well. And we'll see John there. We'll see Frank Gore, and all the other front office scouting department guys.
It'll be interesting to see who they do send.
Convicted.
Andre Garibay says, I always have those ready. Andre Garibay says Kyle should go. With his first-round track record, he should be front row. Yeah, the Niners have only signed 2 of their 7 first-round draft picks to second contracts. That's under 30%. So it certainly could be better. But, here's the thing. I don't know that Kyle watching the Combine workouts would make them any better at picking the guy. That's the thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And I think he feels the same way. And he's right. He has a point. You should trust your tape evaluations and you shouldn't be swayed by the Combine and those types of results too much, right? So I get it. I get it from his standpoint. Like I said, they'll be well represented regardless. So I'm not too worried about it.
We will be here covering it all for you, regardless of what happens. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, like and subscribe to Steph's YouTube channel as well. Just search Steph49K. It pops right up. Steph, thank you for all your hard work when it comes to the draft sheet. Again, I did drop the link in the chat. If you want it, I'll put a link in the audio description of the podcast as well, so everybody can go and check that out. Thank you, Steph, for letting me pinch hit. I know you'd rather talk to Jay.
Yeah, it was all right.
Yeah. Okay. I respect the honesty. But thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, and we'll talk tomorrow.
Peace.